Marissa receives an accidental audio message from her daughter, Lena, meant for Lena's husband. In it, Lena mocks Marissa, reveals long-held resentment, and hints at a disturbing family secret Marissa never knew. Please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know what country you are listening from. Drop a comment below and enjoy the listen. The rain had started just after sunset, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the windows like a metronome for the silence inside Marissa Cole's house. She sat curled on the edge of her couch, a book unopened in her lap, the television muted. The house was quiet, as it always was when she was alone. But tonight, the quiet felt different. It felt expectant. At 11:42 p.m., her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A voice message from Lena. Her daughter rarely contacted her this late. Lena was precise, polished, and punctual. A message at this hour was out of character. Marissa hesitated, thumb hovering over the play button. Then she tapped. Lena's voice filled the room, warm, laughing, intimate. But it wasn't meant for Marissa. She's so clueless, babe. I swear, she still thinks I respect her. It's pathetic. If she ever found out what really happened that summer, for God, she'd probably have a breakdown. But hey, she's useful. Keeps quiet, cooks, plays the sweet mom. Let her think she matters. The words landed like glass shattering on hardwood. Marissa didn't move. She didn't blink. The rain continued its rhythm outside, but inside her, something had stopped. She replayed the message. Once. Twice. Each time, Lena's voice sounded more foreign, more cruel. The daughter she had raised, the girl she had protected, sacrificed for, was mocking her. And not just mocking. Hiding something. What really happened that summer? Marissa stood slowly, her body moving before her mind caught up. She walked to her bedroom, opened the drawer beneath her jewelry box, and pulled out a leather-bound journal. It was old, the pages yellowed, the spine cracked. She hadn't opened it in years. Not since the summer Lena referenced. The summer Marissa had buried. She sat on the edge of her bed, flipping through pages filled with neat cursive entries about family dinners, Lena's moods, her husband's absences. But one entry stopped her cold. July 17th, Lena came home late again. Said she was at the lake with friends. But her clothes were damp, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Marissa closed the journal. Her hands were steady. Her breath even. But her mind was racing, pulling threads, connecting dots, replaying moments she had dismissed as teenage rebellion. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stared out into the night. The street was empty. The porch light flickered once, then held. She thought of Lena's husband, Daniel. Quiet, polite, always watching. Had he known? Had he helped? The message had opened a door. And behind it, Marissa sensed a storm. She didn't cry. She didn't call Lena. She didn't respond. Instead, she began to remember. And by morning, she would begin to plan. The morning after the message, Marissa woke before sunrise. The house was still, the air cool. She moved through the kitchen like a ghost, boiling water for tea, slicing fruit, setting the table for one. Her movements were automatic, but her mind was anything but quiet. She kept hearing Lena's voice. Let her think she matters. It wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. And it wasn't new. Marissa sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from her cup. She thought back to Lena's teenage years, the subtle shifts in tone, the way her daughter's smile had changed. It used to be warm, open. But somewhere around 16, it became something else, tight, performative. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. She remembered one afternoon in particular. It was summer. Lena had come home late, claiming she'd been at the lake with friends. Her clothes were damp, her hair smelled faintly of chlorine, and her eyes darted when Marissa asked simple questions. Did you eat? Yeah, we grabbed something. Who was there? Just the usual. But Marissa had seen the car parked 2 blocks away. A black sedan. Not one she recognized. And Lena had never mentioned a boy named Daniel until weeks later, when she introduced him as her study partner. That was the first time Marissa felt the shift. The first time Lena smiled and Marissa knew it was a lie. She didn't confront her. She never did. Confrontation wasn't Marissa's way. She believed in watching, waiting, collecting pieces until the picture was clear. And now, years later, the picture was forming. She walked to the living room and opened the drawer beneath the bookshelf. Inside was a small wooden box, her keepsake chest. Photos, letters, old receipts. She pulled out a photograph from Lena's high school graduation. Lena stood between Marissa and her father, smiling wide. But Marissa remembered that day vividly. Lena had barely spoken to her. She'd spent the morning locked in her room, came down only when it was time to leave. During the ceremony, she'd hugged her father, laughed with friends, but when Marissa reached out, Lena had stiffened just slightly. Enough for Marissa to feel it. And yet, in the photo, Lena's smile was perfect. The smile that lied. Marissa placed the photo on the coffee table and sat back. She thought of all the times Lena had used that smile, at family dinners, in front of neighbors, during holidays. Always polite. Always distant. She had mistaken it for maturity. Independence. But now she saw it for what it was, a mask. The audio message hadn't created the betrayal. It had confirmed it. Marissa stood and walked to the hallway closet. Inside, behind the coats, was a box labeled Lena, College. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were notebooks, old essays, and a leather-bound journal. Not Marissa's, Lena's. She hesitated. Then opened it. The first few pages were harmless as class notes, doodles, quotes. But halfway through, she found an entry dated September 3rd. Mom's so easy to manipulate. She wants to believe I'm good, so I let her. I smile, I nod, I say what she wants to hear. She never asks the right questions. She never sees the real me. And that's exactly how I want it. Marissa closed the journal. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat in silence, letting the truth settle like dust on old furniture. Her daughter had been lying for years. Not just about the summer. About everything. And now, Marissa wasn't just remembering. She was preparing. The journal sat heavy in Marissa's lap, its leather cover worn smooth from years of handling. It wasn't hers, this one belonged to Lena. She had found it tucked inside a box of college notebooks, hidden beneath essays and old receipts. The discovery felt deliberate, as if Lena had buried it there to keep it from prying eyes. But Marissa's hands had always been patient, her instincts sharper than her daughter ever realized. She hesitated before opening it again. The first entry she had read the night before still echoed in her mind, Mom's so easy to manipulate. She wants to believe I'm good, so I let her. She never asks the right questions. She never sees the real me. And that's exactly how I want it. The words had cut deeper than any blade. But Marissa wasn't here for pain. She was here for truth. She flipped through the pages slowly, her eyes scanning Lena's handwriting, neat, precise, almost clinical. The entries began innocently enough, notes about classes, professors, late-night study sessions. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The writing grew sharper, more confessional, as if Lena had used the journal to unburden herself of secrets she couldn't share aloud. Daniel says I shouldn't worry. He says Mom will never figure it out. He laughs when I tell him how easy it is to fool her. Sometimes I think he enjoys it more than I do. Marissa's breath caught. Daniel. Lena's husband. The man who had always been polite, reserved, almost too careful around her. She had sensed something in him, a quiet watchfulness, a way of measuring every word. Now she understood. He wasn't just Lena's confidant. He was her accomplice. She turned another page. That summer was the turning point. If she ever knew what happened at the lake, she'd never forgive me. But Daniel says forgiveness doesn't matter. Power does. And as long as she believes the lie, we're safe. Marissa froze. The lake. The summer Lena had mentioned in the audio message. The summer Marissa had buried in her own journals. She remembered the damp clothes, the evasive answers, the black sedan parked 2 blocks away. She remembered the unease that had settled in her chest, the feeling that something was wrong. And now, here it was, written in Lena's own hand. She closed the journal, pressing her palm against the cover as if to contain the storm inside. Her mind raced, pulling threads together, Lena's lies, Daniel's influence, the summer at the lake. The pieces were forming a picture, but the edges were still blurred. She needed more. Marissa stood and walked to her bedroom. She opened her own drawer, pulled out her old journal, and placed it beside Lena's. 2 books. 2 voices. 2 versions of the same summer. She flipped through her entries, comparing them to Lena's. Where Marissa had written of suspicion, Lena had written of manipulation. Where Marissa had noted silence, Lena had confessed secrets. The contrast was damning. Marissa sat back, her eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, the night air heavy with mist. She thought of Lena's smile, the smile that lied. She thought of Daniel's watchful eyes. And she thought of the message that had started it all. She's so clueless, babe. I swear, she still thinks I respect her. Respect. That was the word Lena had chosen. Not love. Not care. Respect. And even that was a lie. Marissa closed both journals and placed them side by side on the table. She stared at them for a long time, her mind sharpening, her resolve hardening. The truth was no longer hidden. It was here, in ink and memory. And now, it was hers to use. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't crumble. Instead, she began to plan. The journals lay side by side on Marissa's coffee table, their covers closed but their weight pressing against her chest like stones. She had spent the night reading, cross-referencing, remembering. By dawn, her eyes burned, but her mind was sharper than it had been in years. The pieces were forming, but one question remained: who was at the lake that summer? She rose from the couch, her movements deliberate, and walked to the hallway closet. Inside, beneath folded blankets and boxes of holiday decorations, was a shoebox she hadn't touched in years. She pulled it out, carried it to the table, and lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, snapshots of birthdays, graduations, vacations. She sifted through them slowly, her fingers brushing against glossy paper, until one photo stopped her cold. It was a picture of Lena, taken the summer she turned 17. She was standing near the lake, her hair damp, her smile wide. But it wasn't Lena who froze Marissa's breath. It was the man standing beside her. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark hair. Eyes that seemed to pierce even through the faded print. A man Marissa recognized instantly. David Mercer. The name hit her like a blow. David had been part of her past, a shadow she had worked hard to forget. Years ago, he had been a friend of her husband's, a man who lingered too long at family gatherings, whose gaze had unsettled her. He had disappeared suddenly, after whispers of trouble, and Marissa had never asked questions. Some doors were better left closed. But here he was, in a photo with Lena. At the lake. The very summer Lena had tried to bury. Marissa's hands trembled for the first time. She stared at the photo, her mind racing. Why was David with Lena? What had happened between them? And why had Lena never mentioned him? She flipped the photo over. On the back, in Lena's handwriting, were 3 words: Summer of Freedom. Marissa felt her stomach twist. Freedom. For Lena, freedom had always meant rebellion, secrecy, escape. But with David Mercer? That wasn't freedom. That was danger. She placed the photo beside the journals, the three artifacts forming a triangle of truth. Lena's words, Marissa's suspicions, David's presence. Together, they told a story Marissa wasn't ready to face, but couldn't ignore. Her mind drifted back to that summer. She remembered the nights Lena came home late, damp and evasive. She remembered the black sedan parked near the corner. She remembered the way Lena's smile had grown sharper, colder. And she remembered the silence, her own silence, when she chose not to confront, not to pry. Now, she realized that silence had cost her more than she knew. Marissa stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was waking, neighbors leaving for work, children waiting for buses. The world looked ordinary. But inside her house, the past was clawing its way back. She thought of Lena's message. If she ever found out what really happened that summer, she thought of the journal. Daniel says forgiveness doesn't matter. Power does. And she thought of the photo. David Mercer, standing beside her daughter, smiling like a man who knew he had already won. Marissa's resolve hardened. This wasn't just betrayal. This was danger. And if Lena and Daniel thought she would remain silent, they were wrong. She placed the photo back in the box, closed the journals, and sat at the table. Her plan was forming, not out of anger, but out of necessity. She would uncover the truth. She would confront the lies. And she would do it quietly, strategically, the way she had always lived. Because silence wasn't weakness. Silence was preparation. And the storm was coming. The morning was gray, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Marissa dressed carefully, dark slacks, a simple blouse, her hair pulled back. She wanted no distractions, no softness. Today wasn't about comfort. It was about clarity. She slipped Lena's journal into her bag, along with the photo of David Mercer. Two weapons, disguised as memories. Then she drove across town to Lena's house. The neighborhood was quiet, manicured lawns and trimmed hedges lining the street. Lena's home stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, its white shutters gleaming against the gloom. Marissa parked at the curb, sat for a moment, and steadied her breath. She wasn't here for Lena. Not yet. She was here for Daniel. Daniel answered after the second knock. He looked surprised to see her, his dark eyes flicking quickly from her face to the bag at her side. Marissa, he said, voice smooth, polite. This is unexpected. Marissa studied him. His tone was calm, but his posture betrayed him, shoulders slightly tense, one hand gripping the doorframe too tightly. I thought we should talk, she said evenly. Just you and me. Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course. Come in. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and cologne. A stack of papers sat on the table, neatly arranged. Daniel gestured toward the couch. Sit, he said. Marissa remained standing. I won't be long. Daniel's smile was practiced, the kind that never reached his eyes. What's on your mind? Marissa placed the photo on the table. David Mercer's face stared up at them both. Daniel's smile faltered. You know him, Marissa said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the photo, then shifted back to her. Where did you find this? In Lena's things, Marissa replied. From the summer she called her freedom. Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. That was years ago. Marissa's voice sharpened. Years don't erase truth. Tell me what happened at the lake. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The ticking of a wall clock filled the room. Daniel's jaw tightened. You've always been curious, he said finally. But curiosity can be dangerous. Marissa stepped closer. Dangerous for who? For Lena? For you? Or for me? Daniel's eyes narrowed. You don't want to know the details. I already know enough, Marissa said, her tone steady. Lena's journal. The message she sent me. The lies. What I don't know is why David Mercer was with her. Why he disappeared. And why you've been helping her bury it. Daniel's mask slipped. His voice dropped, low and sharp. Because some truths destroy families. And Lena was smart enough to understand that. Marissa's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. And you? What's your role in all this? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. My role is to protect her. To protect us. You were never supposed to hear that message. You were never supposed to see that photo. Marissa held his gaze. But I did. The house was silent when Marissa returned from her visit with Daniel. But inside her mind, silence had become a forge. Every word he had spoken, every flicker of his expression, every warning disguised as politeness, it all burned like fuel. If you dig too deep, you won't like what you find. Daniel exhaled slowly, his composure cracking. David was complicated. He had influence. He had power. Lena got caught up in it. I helped her walk away. That's all you need to know. Marissa's voice was cold. No. That's all you want me to know. She picked up the photo, slid it back into her bag, and turned toward the door. Daniel's voice followed her. If you dig too deep, Marissa, you won't like what you find. She paused, hand on the doorknob, then looked back at him. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. I've lived my whole life in silence, she said. But silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. And I'm done being blind. Then she left, the door closing softly behind her. Marissa replayed that line over and over. It wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. And she had accepted it. For years, she had lived in restraint. She had believed silence was strength, that patience was survival. But now she understood silence differently. It wasn't just endurance, it was a weapon. And she was ready to wield it. She sat at her kitchen table, journals and photographs spread before her like pieces of a puzzle. Lena's words, Daniel's lies, David Mercer's shadow. Together, they formed a map. And Marissa began to chart her course. Marissa knew she couldn't confront Lena directly, not yet. Lena thrived on manipulation, on twisting words until they lost meaning. Confrontation would only feed her power. Instead, Marissa would watch. She would listen. She would collect. She began with small things. Lena's routines. The way she spoke to Daniel. The calls she made late at night. Marissa kept notes, recording times, patterns, inconsistencies. Every detail mattered. Marissa understood that Lena's strength came from Daniel. Together, they were a fortress. But alone, Lena was vulnerable. So Marissa began to create distance. Subtle comments, carefully timed absences, small disruptions that forced Lena to rely less on Daniel and more on herself. She knew Lena would notice. She wanted her to. Suspicion was the first crack in the wall. The journals were her greatest weapon. Lena's own words, written in ink, undeniable. But Marissa wouldn't use them all at once. She would drip the truth slowly, like poison. A page left on a counter. A line quoted in conversation. A memory recalled with precision. Each revelation would unsettle Lena, make her question what Marissa knew, what she had seen, what she might reveal next. Marissa envisioned it clearly. A family gathering. Lena, Daniel, perhaps a few close friends. The perfect stage. She would sit quietly, smile politely, and then, at the right moment, drop the truth like a blade. Not all of it. Just enough to cut. She imagined Lena's face, the smile faltering, the mask slipping. She imagined Daniel's silence, his composure cracking. And she imagined the room shifting, the balance of power tilting. Marissa would write it carefully, in her own hand. A letter to Lena, filled with truths only Lena would understand. References to the lake, to David Mercer, to the lies she thought were buried. The letter would arrive after the dinner, a final warning. I know what you did. I know who you were with. And I know why you lied. It wouldn't be a threat. It would be a promise. Marissa knew she couldn't stay forever. The plan wasn't about confrontation, it was about liberation. Once the truth was exposed, once Lena's world began to collapse, Marissa would leave. Quietly, deliberately. A departure that spoke louder than any words. She imagined packing her bags, walking out the door, leaving behind the house, the silence, the lies. She imagined Lena watching, powerless to stop her. And she imagined the peace that would follow. Marissa closed the journals, stacked the photographs, and sat back. Her plan was clear. Her path was set. She wasn't driven by anger anymore. She was driven by justice. By the need to reclaim her voice, her power, her truth. Silence had been her shield. Now, it was her sword. And the reckoning had begun. The invitation had gone out quietly, almost casually. A family dinner, nothing unusual. Lena thought it was her idea, an opportunity to show harmony, to keep appearances polished. But in truth, Marissa had planted the seed days earlier, nudging Lena toward the gathering with subtle suggestions. By the time the evening arrived, the stage was set. The dining room glowed with warm light, the chandelier casting golden shadows across polished wood. The table was dressed in linen, silverware gleaming, wine glasses waiting. It looked ordinary, even welcoming. But beneath the surface, tension hummed like an electric current. Marissa sat at the far end of the table, her posture straight, her expression calm. Lena and Daniel took their seats opposite her, their smiles rehearsed, their voices smooth. A few close relatives filled the remaining chairs, chatting lightly, unaware of the storm brewing. Dinner began with polite conversation. Lena complimented the roast, Daniel poured wine, laughter floated across the table. To anyone watching, it was a picture of family unity. But Marissa's eyes never left Lena. She watched the way her daughter's smile flickered, the way her hand tightened around her glass when Marissa spoke. Finally, Marissa leaned forward, her voice soft but deliberate. Do you remember the summer at the lake, Lena? The room stilled. Forks paused mid-air. Lena's smile froze. Of course, Lena said quickly, her tone light. We had so much fun back then. Marissa's gaze sharpened. Yes. Fun. Though I remember you coming home late. Damp clothes. Avoiding my eyes. Daniel shifted in his seat. Lena laughed, too loudly. Teenagers, Mom. You know how it is. Marissa didn't smile. I found a photo recently. You and David Mercer. At the lake. The name dropped like a stone into water. The relatives glanced at each other, confused. Lena's face drained of color. Daniel's jaw tightened. Lena forced a laugh. David? That was ages ago. He was just around. Marissa's voice was calm, steady. Around. Yes. And yet, you never mentioned him. Not once. Curious, isn't it? Daniel interjected, his tone smooth but strained. Marissa, perhaps this isn't the time, Marissa cut him off with a glance. The time is now. Because silence has lasted long enough. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, sensing the undercurrent. Lena's mask began to crack. Her smile faltered, her eyes darted. Mom, she said, her voice trembling slightly, why are you bringing this up? Marissa leaned back, her expression unreadable. Because truth has a way of surfacing. Even when people try to bury it. The table was silent. The relatives stared, unsure whether to speak. Lena's hands shook as she set down her glass. Daniel's composure slipped, his voice low, sharp. You don't know what you're talking about. Marissa's eyes locked onto his. I know enough. I know about the journals. I know about the lies. And I know that summer wasn't freedom. It was betrayal. Lena's breath caught. Her face flushed, her mask shattered. "Mom, please," she whispered. Marissa's voice was quiet, but it carried. "You thought I was blind. You thought silence meant weakness. But silence is preparation. And tonight, I'm prepared." The relatives excused themselves awkwardly, sensing the storm. The room shrank to three: Marissa, Lena, Daniel. The air was thick, heavy. Lena's voice broke. "You don't understand. You never did." Marissa's reply was cold, precise. "No, Lena. I understood more than you realized. I just waited. And now, the waiting is over." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This conversation is finished." Marissa's gaze held him. "No, Daniel. It's only beginning." Dinner ended in silence. Plates untouched, wine glasses half full. Lena retreated to her room, Daniel pacing the hallway. Marissa remained at the table, calm, composed, her plan unfolding exactly as she had envisioned. The cracks had formed. The fortress was weakening. And soon, the collapse would come. The house was quiet after the dinner. Too quiet. Lena had retreated into her room, Daniel pacing like a caged animal, his composure fraying. But Marissa had left with calm precision, her silence sharper than any words. That night, she sat at her desk, a single lamp illuminating the page before her. The journals lay open, the photo of David Mercer beside them. She picked up her pen and began to write. Marissa's handwriting was deliberate, each stroke measured. She didn't rush. She wanted Lena to feel the weight of every word, to hear her mother's voice in the silence between sentences. "Lena," she began. "I know what you did that summer. I know who you were with. I know the lies you told, the masks you wore, the way you mocked me when you thought I wasn't listening. You believed silence meant blindness. But silence is not weakness. Silence is preparation." She paused, the pen hovering. The rain tapped against the window, steady, relentless. She thought of Lena's laughter in the audio message, the cruelty in her tone. She thought of Daniel's warning, his attempt to control the narrative. And she thought of David Mercer, the shadow that had returned to haunt them all. "You and Daniel built your fortress on lies. But lies crack. Lies collapse. And I will not carry them for you anymore." Her hand trembled slightly, but she steadied it. "You said I was clueless. You said I was pathetic. But I have seen more than you realize. I have waited longer than you know. And now, Lena, the waiting is over." The letter wasn't long, but it was sharp. Each line cut deeper, not with anger, but with truth. Marissa didn't accuse. She didn't scream. She simply revealed. David Mercer was not freedom. He was danger. And you chose him. You chose the lie. You chose to bury me beneath your silence. But silence speaks, Lena. And mine is speaking now. She signed her name at the bottom, her hand steady. Then she folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it. The next morning, Marissa walked to Lena's house. The street was quiet, the air heavy with mist. She placed the envelope in the mailbox, her movements calm, deliberate. No note, no explanation. Just the letter. She stood for a moment, staring at the house. She imagined Lena finding the envelope, opening it, reading the words. She imagined the silence that would follow, the silence of realization, of collapse, of reckoning. Then she turned and walked away. Inside the house, Lena would eventually find the letter. She would open it with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words, her breath catching. She would hear her mother's voice in every line, feel the weight of truth pressing against her chest. Daniel wouldn't be able to shield her. The letter was personal, intimate, undeniable. It was Marissa's voice, unfiltered, unbroken. And for the first time, Lena would realize that her mother wasn't blind. She wasn't weak. She wasn't clueless. She was prepared. Marissa returned home, her steps steady, her heart calm. She didn't need to see Lena's reaction. She didn't need to hear the confrontation. The letter was enough. Silence had carried her for years. Now, silence would carry Lena. And in that silence, the truth would echo louder than any words. The letter had been delivered. The silence that followed was louder than any confrontation. For days, Lena avoided her mother. She moved through her house like a shadow, her smile gone, her voice brittle. Daniel tried to steady her, but his own composure was cracking. The fortress they had built of lies, manipulation, secrecy, was crumbling. And Marissa had lit the match. It began quietly. Lena found the letter on the kitchen counter, the envelope torn open, her mother's handwriting staring back at her. She read it once, then again, then again. Each line cut deeper, each truth undeniable. David Mercer was not freedom. He was danger. And you chose him. Her hands shook. Her breath came shallow. She pressed the letter to her chest, as if holding it could erase the words. But the words were already inside her, echoing, relentless. She locked herself in her room, pacing, muttering, replaying memories she had buried. The lake. The car. David's voice. Daniel's laughter. Her own lies. And then, the audio message, the one she had sent by mistake. She replayed it in her mind, hearing her own cruelty, her own arrogance. She's so clueless, babe. Let her think she matters. Now, the words mocked her. Not her mother. Her. Daniel watched Lena unravel. He tried to calm her, tried to remind her of their plan, their secrecy, their control. But the letter had pierced their armor. She knows too much, Lena whispered, her voice trembling. She knows about David. She knows about us. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we make her stop. We silence her. But Lena shook her head. You don't understand. She's already spoken. The letter, it's proof. It's everything. Daniel's composure broke. He slammed his fist against the wall, his voice sharp. She's just your mother. She can't destroy us. But Lena's eyes were wide, haunted. She already has. Meanwhile, Marissa lived in calm silence. She didn't confront Lena. She didn't argue with Daniel. She simply waited, her plan unfolding exactly as she had envisioned. She watched from a distance as Lena's mask shattered, as Daniel's control slipped, as the fortress collapsed. She didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking for her. Neighbors began to whisper. Relatives asked questions. The photo of David Mercer surfaced, the journals hinted at betrayal. The cracks widened, the lies spilled out. And Marissa remained steady, her silence louder than any accusation. One evening, Lena appeared at Marissa's door. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her hands clutching the letter. Why did you do this? She whispered. Marissa looked at her daughter, her voice calm. Because you thought I was blind. Because you thought silence meant weakness. But silence is strength. And it was time you learned that. Lena's tears fell, her voice breaking. You've ruined everything. Marissa's reply was quiet, but sharp. No, Lena. You ruined it yourself. I simply stopped carrying your lies. Daniel stood behind Lena, his face hard, his eyes cold. But he said nothing. He knew the battle was lost. The next morning, Marissa packed her bags. She didn't announce it. She didn't explain. She simply left. She walked out of the house, her steps steady, her heart calm. Lena watched from the window, powerless, broken. Daniel stood beside her, silent, defeated. Marissa didn't look back. She didn't need to. The collapse was complete. Months later, Lena's marriage fractured. Daniel drifted away, his influence gone. The whispers grew louder, the truth spread wider. Lena's reputation crumbled, her mask gone forever. And Marissa lived in peace. Her silence had spoken. Her plan had succeeded. She had uncovered the hidden truth in her daughter's voice. And in the end, it was Lena who was left in silence.